And thank you for joining us for this pre-election webinar. A week away. We have 3 questions there, which is what the first one that we modified. Will we have election next week? There have been suggestions that maybe anything might happen before the election. But I think the question should be modified to ask whether we should have an election at all, given all that is going on. So we'd like our panelists to deal with that. Should elections have gone ahead, given the pre-election, the electoral process up to now? The second question, of course, is the likely outcome, both in terms of possible victors or possible disputed outcome, and what that will mean. Last but not least, what should be done? Are elections a solution for Zimbabwe? Or we should look beyond that, especially given that this election appears to be a watershed in the history of Zimbabwe. Watershed between the past, in which the liberation struggle narrative and the rhetoric thereto have been dominant. They are now fading, also through natural attrition. And on the other, a generational shift, which has maybe delayed, but appears to some of us imminent and imminent. So, to get us going, I have Barbara Bebe from the Electoral Resource Center. I believe Barbara has been busy all day on various webinars. The more reason why we should have her here she's been before, one of our resource persons. So Barbara, take it from me.
Thank you, Ibo. So what happened to the music today?
There's been a problem with our technician. There is no ZESA. Can you believe? We thought there would be there'll be no load shedding until after the election, but something has gone wrong.
Oh, okay. No, that's fine.
Probably
yeah, next time. So you asked the question, should we have elections next week, and what do we anticipate to be the possible outcome, and what should be done? I think, allow me, as the Election Resource Center, we have been monitoring the pre-election environment, and we have been doing that through a very structured process where we have 4 benchmarks that we are assessing. The first one pertains to the openness of the electoral environment. The second one, we've been looking at the conduct of public institutions and promoting credible, free and fair elections in Zimbabwe. And then thirdly, we've also been looking at the conduct of the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission as well. And lastly, the conduct of political parties. So as I attempt to respond to the question whether we should have elections next week, I am going to cover, what we think as the ERC is the state, has been the state of the pre-election environment based on those 4 pillars. In other countries, elections signify hope. They signify an opportunity to exercise freely the right to choose leaders at different levels of government. They also signify a display of citizens' power to decide their future, an opportunity for change, a chance to see and witness changes within the governance sphere. this is what happens in other contexts when it comes to elections. But in Zimbabwe, the situation is quite different. I'm sure you'll agree with me. Elections bring fear to the citizens, and many have concluded that elections do not work. This has been based on historical events where the results of our electoral processes have consistently been disputed. The 2023 pre-election environment is not any different from what the country has witnessed in previous elections. But what we have seen, though, is that the strategies that are used either to suppress voters, to suppress freedom of expression, amongst other freedoms, the strategies are now different. We've seen subtle means of intimidation that have been used to sway voters to vote for the ruling party, particularly in the rural areas. We've also seen that the strategy of using open violence has not been prevalent for this particular election. And this is one thing that has made people to conclude that there is generally, a peaceful environment ahead of the elections next week. But let me say that despite the absence of open violence, there is a lot is happening underneath that. And there are concerns that we may possibly see an upsurge of violence in the immediate post-election period, particularly as contestations regarding the results begin to surface. The government has opened election observation to both regional and international observation. But surprisingly, the government has also been quite critical of some of these groups. For those that have been following reports in the media, you may have come across articles that have been criticizing seriously the Carter Center election observation mission. We are also facing a highly litigated election. So many court cases, some have been concluded, some are yet to be concluded. And I am certain that as we head to the 23rd of August, we are going to see a lot more cases. And in the midst of that, we've seen concerns, we are getting concerns that the courts are being used to block candidates and also to eliminate competition within this election. Two prominent opposition leaders remain in prison, that is Job Sikala and Jacob Ngarivume. A lot of people had hoped that Job Sikala was going to be released from prison before the election, but this has not happened. This has not happened. There is massive vote buying. I'm not going to dwell much on this because we do have Dr. Gordon Moyo as part of this panel, and he's done a lot of research on this, and I'm sure he's going to speak to that. In the midst of, where in cases where there is high contestation in an election, you obviously find women being relegated, being sidelined in the process. We only have one female presidential candidate out of 11 candidates. And that is not good for our democracy. I will not talk about the statistics at the parliamentary and local authority level, but the figures are disappointingly low. We also have issues pertaining to the conduct of public institutions. As I mentioned before, our judiciary is said to be biased in its conduct. There are accusations that the police have been applying the Maintenance of Peace and Order Act selectively, mainly to suppress opposition political parties. Okay, I think we are having a challenge here with a lot of opposition political party rallies having been banned. Ibo, are you still there? Is everyone still there?
We're still here. Sorry, we're trying to fix that.
Okay, great. Should I continue? Okay. We've also the Zimbabwe, allow me to talk about the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission at this point. We've seen a bit of positive collaboration between ZEC and civil society. That is in some efforts, like voter registration, the voter registration exercises that happened in the past. But surprisingly, the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission did not accredit a lot of civil society organizations to conduct voter education. And this is quite problematic in the sense that we have a new delimitation. This election will be held using the newly delimited constituencies. And what this means is that a lot of voter polling stations changed. And for this reason, I think a lot of voter education must have been done to alert citizens, to get citizens to understand that their polling stations are going to change. So on election day, there is a likelihood that a lot of people will go and turn out, will go to wrong polling stations, and that is going to affect the voter turnout. And I'm assuming that this is something that is going to affect the urban voter a lot, because in rural areas, we've seen that certain political parties have actually been, had adopted kind of a polling station-based mobilization strategy where their supporters were being told where they are going to vote on election day. ZEC has not, in terms of concerns that remain regarding the commission, I think the major one is the issue of the voters' roll. The commission has not availed the voters' roll to civil society stakeholders, and that is problematic. The voters' roll that the commission availed, particularly to political parties, is said to be not analyzable. To civil society stakeholders, we have not yet received, we did make a request to ZEC for the voters' roll, but we have not been finished with a copy of that. So that is a big concern that I think is going to affect, that this is something that possibly may lead to litigation as we move forward. There are also concerns around the secrecy in the printing of the ballot papers. The commission yesterday did inform stakeholders at its stakeholder briefing that they're already finalizing the printing of the ballot papers, but they have not disclosed who is printing the ballot papers, and they've said that that information is going to be provided to stakeholders. We seem to be having people that are trying to disrupt this meeting, but we'll just go ahead. So the commission has said that they're going to inform stakeholders in terms of how who the ballot of where and by who the ballot papers for the election have been supplied, printed, as well as the total number of ballot papers that have been printed in respect of each polling station, and how these will be distributed to the different polling stations. So that's.
But I don't know.
So that's the information that the commission provided. So we are hoping that on the 19th August, as per their roadmap, they're going to give us that information. But this has kind of caused a bit of alarm from different stakeholders who are alleging that there is a possibility that more ballot papers may be printed. In terms of civil society, the activities of civil society have been undermined, mainly by lack of funding and the pending Private Voluntary Organization Amendment Bill of 2021, which I'm told is now awaiting the president's signature. And also the recent amendments to the Criminal Law Codification and Reform Act, which came to effect in July 2023, including the provisions which have been termed the Patriotic Act, have affected the role that civil society has traditionally played in elections. I'm sure you'll agree with me that not so many organizations are actually coming out to comment on issues pertaining to elections. So we as civil society have just gone into that self-censorship mode, which is not good for our democracy, because we are supposed to critique processes in order for processes or to improve, for our democracy to improve. So that is something that is quite concerning. Lastly, I'm going to talk about the media and traditional leaders. Unequal access to state media remains a concern, with ZANU-PF dominating, the state media in terms of coverage of its political rallies or political activities at the expense of other political parties. And I think that is a big concern. And then with regards to traditional leaders, the usual partisan behavior of traditional leaders remain. And in some cases, we have received reports that traditional leaders are intimidating citizens and actually directing them to vote for ZANU-PF. And that is not proper, because the law does not allow traditional leaders to conduct themselves in a partisan manner. I'll end here for now. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Barbara. Just a bit of follow-up. The big question: should the opposition in particular, but also generally all those organizations involved with elections, should they have gone ahead with the election, given the problems you've outlined, given the problems we know, given the glitches and hitches so far experienced, from the limitation to the voters' roll issue? Should there be an election? Would the opposition have been justified to have pulled out of the election, given what has happened so far? Hello? Barbara? Can you hear me, Barbara? Barbara, can you hear me? It doesn't work properly.
Yes, I was failing to unmute. It looks like you had taken control of that function. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we did that because of the interference. So we're controlling
that. That's okay.
Yes,
that's fine. So,
you got my question?
Yes, your question is, should the opposition go for this election? And my response to that is that, unfortunately, we will never have a perfect electoral environment. And I think the reason why different, forces like civil society exist is so that we continue to push for an environment that at least is conducive for the election to be held. But in terms of whether or not the opposition should participate in this election, I think the opposition must make that decision. The opposition has continued to conduct its rallies, despite their concerns around the voters' roll, the banning of the rallies, amongst other issues. They have continued. So as civil society, our role is basically to continue to advocate for an environment that will be conducive for the election. And we will then comment and say whether or not this election is credible based on our understanding of the different processes. But the decision for the opposition...
Why is it not possible for yourselves as ERC, ZESN, and indeed civic society in general, to make a determination of whether the elections are likely to be free, fair, and credible? you have been witness to the various webinars we have held over the year, and you know that basically the verdict was that the elections are unlikely to be free, fair, and credible. So my question is, what is the role? Is it a compelling that people must go into election regardless? This is my question.
Yeah, that's a very difficult question, Ibo, because as I've said, that we have been monitoring the environment and we have been pointing out issues concerning the electoral environment at every point, from the time of the delimitation, the voter registration, all the electoral processes. And for us as the Election Resource Center, we do believe that elections are not just an event. You know, we believe in that electoral cycle approach. And when we do issue, you know, our statement at the end of this whole process, post 23, August, it is going to, we will make that determination in terms of whether we think this election would have been credible or not.
How would you explain this compulsion on the part of Zimbabweans to go into election after election, even when they are warned? I mean, I remember in 2013 attending the SADC extraordinary summit called by the head of state to try and persuade Mugabe to postpone the 2013 elections a month before the elections, right? And the heads of state had enough intelligence from the embassies in Harare, on the basis of which they were recommending that the elections be postponed until the conditions are conducive enough towards a free, fair, and credible election. And of course, Mugabe pretended that he would postpone the election, but as you know, there was a case which was brought before the Supreme Court, and the elections went ahead. But at the end of the summit, the heads of state had a meeting with Changirai, BT, and Welshman Mule. And I was just outside the door. And they were warned that if you go into the elections, you will regret it because the elections are already fixed. Well, to cut a long story short, the opposition decided to go for elections regardless. And 5 days, it was a Friday, 5 days before the election, Morgan Tsvangirai phoned me. I was in the UK on my way back home from the US. And he said the election has been rigged. I said, how do you know that? So I got information from inside, 5 days before. And I reminded him of the meeting that had been held in Maputo. He says, well, there's nothing we could do. We just had to go ahead to the election. Now, is this the same? Is it a question of history repeating itself? Because the warnings are very clear. The manner in which the ZANU-PF and the state have managed the campaign leaves little to doubt that the election may be fixed already. What is your view on that? Barbara? Barbara?
Yes, I was failing to unmute. At this point, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes, I'm saying that at this point, whether the CCC decides to withdraw from this race, the election will go ahead either way. In the same way that when Morgan Tsvangirai decided to withdraw his candidacy ahead of the presidential runoff, the election went ahead. Fine, it was considered a sham election, but the election, I think, will still go ahead. You had asked the question, will the election go ahead next week? I think that we are now too close to the election and nothing can change that from happening at this point. And yes, of course, history may repeat itself.
Barbara, the argument by those who insist on electoral reform, insist on the conditions being conducive to free, fair, and credible elections, would argue that the opposition withdrawing from the election would send a very clear message for the future. And even if though the ruling party would go ahead with the election, and there are enough parties around who would participate anyway, is that the election would be reduced to a sham anyway.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned the runoff in 2008. You know very clearly that the region, SADC, refused to recognize that runoff. Are you aware of that?
Yes,
the election
I am aware.
Was not recognized.
Yeah, it was considered a sham election.
Exactly. So what is wrong in having an election caused to be a sham? Why do we have this compulsion that elections must be held regardless? Huh? Is it what's the name Monzora said? It's what word did he use? Foolish bravery. Is it foolish bravery?
Yeah, I think that the politicians, particularly maybe Nelson can answer that in terms of why the CCC, amongst other political parties, have decided that they are still going ahead with this particular election. And maybe also I would be interested in knowing what you think is the solution.
Well, I'll give my views at the end, but I've already hinted as to what should have been done. Anyway.
Yes.
I think.
I just wanted you to come out in the open.
I'm very clear. I think the elections should not be held, given what has happened so far, at all. Okay. You know, and I think it is foolish bravery.
Wait,
go ahead. That's my position. Anyway, Bob, I'll come back. To you.
Yeah. Thank you.
I'll now move to Zikamai.
Yeah, my view, I think, to the questions is that indeed the elections will take place. This is because I think the legacy, the history, the precedents that we have in our country, despite how bad the run-up to elections might look like, as long as there is no real threat to the ruling party, as the chairperson of ZEC has said, nothing short of an earthquake will stop elections happening in Zimbabwe. So we've got political leaders who are bent on having elections at any cost. Doesn't matter to them how many people run up to elections. It doesn't matter to them how many human rights violations are committed. They are prepared to drag this country throughout an election, screaming and kicking, even through a flood of bloodshed. They are prepared to do that. So I see that happening. Unless, of course, there is a real threat to those who hold power, as we saw in 2017, then a military coup happened instead of a proper election because there was a real threat to those in power. There was a real threat to the security establishment. I do not see that current threat in the current atmosphere. Perhaps what we could also reflect on is when we then look at the current election and the upcoming election, what is new? Will there be any different outcome? And I think that another question for reflection was about the outcome of that election. And my response to that is, what is new in 2023 that was not in 2018 and in all the previous elections to warrant an expectation of a different outcome? First, for me, is the election euphoria in 2023 is kind of suppressed. It's not as much as it was in 2018 when there was a real hope of realizing the people's will. This was a time when Mugabe had just been dislodged, and a good number of the population did have the hope that the new regime had the will of the people at heart. And there had been so many promises. It had been endorsed even by the opposition, who believed that it was a miracle, that the coup was a miracle. and that the military had assisted the people of Zimbabwe. So in 2018, there was high election euphoria. People believed it was a different atmosphere, and the belief of invincibility within the ruling party, particularly in the person of Mugabe, had been shaken, and there was indeed change in the air. That does not exist in 2023. People have seen that the Second Republic is fake. The promised electoral reforms did not happen. The Montlandy Commission recommendations were not implemented, and the economic situation has become worse. The looting has become worse. So the situation in 2023 is worse than 2018. It is a bit hopeless. There is apathy. A lot of people do not believe in the electoral system. They do not believe that the people themselves have a fair shot at actually getting their free expression, winning the ballot come 23 August. So there is that level of despair. I know that, you know, as campaigners for human rights, as campaigners for participation, for us to speak like this, it might feel like a message of discouragement, but it is the truth. We still need to emphasize that regardless of that terrible situation, it's important for people to turn up and do their best to express themselves. The second thing for me that I would highlight that is different about this election is there's no visible military boots in the streets. So that is different from 2018. In 2018, the military was all over. The late Sibusiso Moyo had said that the election was going to finish what the coup had started. So there was a very strong military presence in the streets. That is kind of transformed. I would love to think that the ruling elite has had enough time to strategize and to create a facade of the absence of this security establishment within elections. But however, that factor has been replaced by other factors, other actors like the FARS group, who are strongly linked to the security sector, who are strongly linked to the military institutions. So in as much as there is no visible military boots on the streets, but there are actors who are using tools and tactics that are just the same as those of the security establishment. We have seen the activities of the FARS in different countries. In Zaka, we had members who were alleged to belong to this group moving with motorbikes, asking people to yes, voting for ZANU-PF. We have had people being frog-marched in different places, over 100 rallies of the opposition, been banned by the police. So you've got state institutions, security institutions, as well as non-state but security-related institutions still very much active. The third thing is we still have a judiciary that is willing to interpret the law more to exclude and disenfranchise than to include. So you've already mentioned, Dr. Mandaza, in your introduction, and Barbara has already mentioned that this is a highly litigated electoral process. And in the few judgments that have already been passed, it has become very clear that the judiciary is still willing to interpret the law in a way that excludes participation rather than includes participation. So exclusion is still very, very strong, with the diaspora vote not yet included in our elections. Then we have the civic space in which we are operating. We have the PVO bill hanging over our heads, and we have the Patriotic Act, which has now been signed into law. And that creates a certain atmosphere in which civil society isn't able to do its work robustly. That is in terms of civic engagement, mobilizing people to participate, but also in terms of documenting human rights violations. On the media space is still the same. It's still biased. We have recommendations of the Montlandy Commission that have been ignored, giving an atmosphere of impunity and strengthening the capacity of perpetrators of post-election violence, that they can still do it and nothing will come to them. In terms of the future, Dr. Mandaza, we do not expect that the upcoming elections, no matter who wins, will represent the true will of the people. This is because all the key aspects of a credible election is, as you yourself, as we have discussed on this platform, and there's a RAO report that actually also covers that, all those key aspects currently have been violated. If you look at the issues of around information, insulation, inclusion, irreversibility, integrity, and Barbara has already mentioned about the integrity around the election management board. So those things, the violations that are happening, we've got some scary statistics around the increase in human rights violations as we draw close to the elections. So those, for us, that tells us that we do not expect that there will be a free expression of the people in the upcoming elections. The electoral contest, the upcoming elections will definitely be contested. This is because the contest itself has already begun in the courts and in the pronouncements. I am not convinced that the international community, while expressing concern, is willing to do more than just the condemnations to help the free expression of the people in these elections. My disappointment with the international community is that we are one of the many countries in which they are jetting into to tick the boxes, write the reports, and dash to the next country that is holding elections. So it is creating what looks more for me like a viable election industry, moving from one market to another. As a result, really fixing and dealing with the mess which every election is going to create for us rests in the hands of the people of Zimbabwe. Will there be violence? Yes, there will be violence. There's already violence that is happening. About 59% of Zimbabweans live in fear of violence, according to the latest Afrobarometer report. Zimrights is going to release the 2022 State of Peace report, which shows that we are living in perpetual state of insecurity. A lot of people live in that state. The elections will be held a day after the death day of the National Peace and Reconciliation Commission, which is coming to an end on the 22nd of August. What does the peace and reconciliation agenda for Zimbabwe look like post-election? If we are going to be expecting some bit of violence, it is usually the policy of any government that takes power after elections to try and reconcile the nation. And the key institution in our national peace architecture will be dead by then. Never mind that they have always been operating like they were dead. The only thing they gave us was the Patriotic Act, but still the same, we need to begin to think about how that architecture can be revived. Will there be any protests? Yes, there will be protests, but I think there will be small, isolated protests. Why is that? It's because of the strong hand of the security sector on the electoral process. If you wanted to protest for the price of bread in this country, you would not be allowed to do that. We tried to do a procession to launch the People's Human Rights Manifesto. We were not allowed to do that. We tried to do a tournament in Rushinga. We were not allowed to do that. What more protesting the outcome of elections? So the reason is because there is still a strong hand of the security sector in the electoral process, but also because the right to protest has been virtually banned in this country. The criminalization of the right to protest is a problem that precedes and will succeed the upcoming elections. So while there may be isolated protests here, I don't think they will be significant. Regarding the contest of the elections, Dr. Mandazai, you had a conversation with my colleague Barbara there. What does the future look like? Why is the opposition participating? It's because Zimbabwe is a very politically sensitive space. And the election euphoria, unfortunately, it creates a bubble, an expectation that the inevitable will happen. And politicians are the worst in terms of being blinded by the election bubble that envelops our country every time we get to the election. That's why you then have Chamisa saying statements like ED has no room for rigging. That is according to the Zim end of 24 July. ED has no room for rigging. Such statements are very dangerous because after the election has been rigged, you want to approach the courts and convince the courts that the elections have been rigged. So such statements, we have heard them from Morgan Tsvangirai, who said, I've got the keys to the election. And the next thing, Mugabe announced an election date, and he was left shocked with his keys to an election. What causes that is the election euphoria, is the bubble that envelops politicians, because there are a lot of crowds around them, and they begin to lose real sight of what is on the ground. But scientific evidence tells us that this election will not allow for the free expression of the people's will. What should we do then? I think it is very important for us to mobilize even now in the face of the PVO Act, of the Patriotic Act, so that we continue to push for real reforms. If I had a way, I think it would be important to actually have a very coordinated effort towards departing from a culture of elections as a ritual. Thank you.
Thanks, Zikamai, for that very cogent presentation. I have to raise two issues which you have raised yourself. The one, the role of observers. Like you, I also feel very uncomfortable about these observer missions, which have been coming at least the last 20 years, for every election, ritually, and making reports usually 2 months after the election, but not before the election, even though many of the missions arrived here more than 2 weeks ago and would have witnessed the kind of things you've been describing. What do you understand as to be the motives of observers in this context? Zikamai? Zikamai?
Yes, I was trying to unmute myself. Thank you.
Okay.
Yes, yeah, like I have mentioned, I think we have fallen into the industry mode of elections, wherein we are one of the many markets that the international community is working on. So they come in, they tick the box, they say condemnations, they move to. So the level of solidarity, I think, is not the kind of one that would cause a real shift in the human rights situation on the ground, or that would push really to ensure that the people have got space, and that we have a real credible election that allows for the free expression of the will of the people. So that is the challenge that we have. How do we resolve that? I think there are two things. One, I think we really need to appreciate, as the people of Zimbabwe, that the real solution to our problems lies with us. So we need really to stand up and demand a free and fair election. But that requires a certain level of solidarity, even with politicians. You did speak about the possibility of a boycott. Now, a boycott is never serious until the main contenders are involved in a serious conversation of a real possible boycott. That then also builds solidarity, even with the international community. And that requires, I think, a level of coordination, both at local level, regional level, and international level. But we do have precedents of when did the international community get to the point of saying enough is enough. What should happen for us to draw a line in the sand to say enough to this performance? A few things that I remember. One is there is need for people, all participants, including the voters, the electorate, and the political leaders, to make a real decision to say, we are not participating in this nonsense. And that happened in the runoff in 2008, when Morgan Tsvangirai was able to say, this is nonsense. Whatever performance that then came after that could not be sold to anyone, because everyone believed that this is nonsense. The second thing that happened there, beyond the people-to-people and leadership solidarity, is robust documentation by human rights groups. When they are able to actually then document the levels of shocking violations that such that it had a shocking effect across the whole world. That is difficult to do with the Patriotic Act hanging over your heads, with the PVO bill, and with the kind of hooligans that are preventing human rights organizations from doing the documentation in different spaces. So those are some of the two things that I think are important. But most importantly, I think is the people to people, people to leadership, and solidarity that needs to be able to, for people to draw a line in the sense.
Yeah, but the Zimbabwean state, and Mnangagwa in particular, seems to have put himself in, albeit inadvertently, into a spot to the extent that this election has become a litmus test for re-engagement, for the debt restructuring, for readmission to the Commonwealth. Do you think, so far, do you think Zimbabwe would feel confident that they are on the right track with respect to that, the three objectives?
Yeah. So what we have in that state, Dr. Mandaza, is a series of contradictions. We have a ruling elite that is not at peace with itself, that is not in harmony with itself. And what we are having around the debt negotiations and all those things is typical of the Second Republic's public relations approach to human rights, to livelihoods. This is what we saw in the post-elections when they appointed the Motlanthe Commission as a public relations act, when they had no intention of following up on what the commission was going to find out. And the kind of rhetoric that we see today is the same kind of rhetoric which we will see in the early days of the post-election when they will be preaching about reconciliation. But there is really no real interest in following up that spirit to the letter. We have seen that in the conversations around the PVO bill, wherein the president did host members of civil society, had dialogue with a number of people, and pretended like they really wanted to listen to issues and concerns around the PVO bill. And before you know it, they signed the Patriotic Act, which is as bad as the PVO bill. So that propaganda and public relations approach to human rights and livelihoods is going to continue, but I don't think they're serious about it.
No, by all indications from both yours and Barbara's representation, it appears that the elections are already flawed and that we're heading for a disputed election again. Nothing new, no surprise. What should be done in the event of a disputed election? Do we wait for the contestants to go to the courts again with the same outcome as before over the last 20 years? Or do you think there should be a new initiative altogether?
Yeah. So there's no easy answer to that, Dr. Mandaza, considering that we are also very late, because I think what needs to be done ought to have been done a long time ago before this particular election. I think it's not an issue of either or, but it's both and. So, for example, the issue around the capacity of the current judiciary to provide, to become a credible dispute resolution mechanism for these elections is already out of the question, based by the very fact that Constitution Amendment Act number 2 has already dealt a severe blow to the independence of the judiciary by allowing the Chief Justice to stay on the job at the time when his tenure had expired. In as much as the reality may be different, but perceptions do matter, there's no more confidence in the current judiciary that it will be able to resolve impartially any electoral disputes that are coming. So that's the very first issue that needs to be fixed. The second issue, I think, is the issue of the integrity of the election management institution. And also I spoke about the environment, I spoke about the PVO bill and all those other things. I think there is need for a new initiative that brings a combo of all these issues that we spoke about in a spirited and well-coordinated push for a national settlement that allows the people of Zimbabwe, in solidarity with the international community, to agree that the minimum conditions for a fair, credible, and free election do exist before they attempt to step into any election. It is becoming problematic because politicians whom we expect to be part of this conversation and to support such efforts believe that Mnangagwa has no way of rigging the elections. Once you start pushing that narrative, it becomes difficult to mobilize people towards a common position that we have got a toxic environment that does not allow for a free expression of the people's will.
Well, Zikamai, thanks for that outline on the election industry, which is really problematic, no doubt about that. We'll come back to you on that. We now move to Gordon Moyo. By the way, I didn't introduce Zikamai sufficiently. He's a young lawyer, very active in the civic society, and one of our up-and-coming civic leaders. We move now to more a veteran, Gordon Moyo. Gordon was in the MDC. He was a minister in the GNU, Minister of Public Enterprises. He's an academic, and he's involved in public policy issues. Gordon Moyo.
Thank you, Prof. Allow me to endorse what my colleagues Barbara and Kamai have said. I identify myself with their presentations, with their submissions. So I will need not rehash what they have said because they've done a good job on that. But allow me to make 2-3 submissions in response to some of the questions that you raised. The first one being, should Zimbabweans or the opposition boycott the elections? I have no answer to that. That's a troubling question to me, and I've been really struggling how to engage it. But one thing comes to mind. ZANU-PF will not be bothered if today the opposition and everybody who is participating in the electoral ecosystem was to say they are not going to be part of it because of the reasons given by my friends. ZANU-PF is very unlikely to be bothered. In fact, they will just move on, march on as if nothing has happened. By the way, the role models of ED are Putin, the Belarusian guy, President Xi Jinping. Those are the people that he admires and idolizes. And those are the people who have nothing serious to do with elections, and no elections when it comes to Xi Jinping's model of governance. So, and the world is actually moving in a way towards this system that Xi Jinping and others are modeling and are moving the world forward to. And at the same time, we see democratic backlash, democratic regression, democratic recession globally. And if you stay away from an election for a good cause, like in Zimbabwe, there is a good reason. But perhaps inadvertently, you may fall into a trap which the auto-crisis, the new auto-crisis, the new autocratization process and regime that is emerging globally is wishing you to get into. So I have difficulties. I am conflicted to say, should we stay away? Should Zimbabwe stay away? Should Zimbabweans come in, participate? But I'm inclined that it is more dangerous. It's both dangerous to participate, but actually I think it's more dangerous not to. Because in participation, at times, uncertain things can happen. In fact, in 2008, we were saying, look, the elections are going to be rigged. The elections were going to, they were already rigged. But the opposition got out of that situation, out of that context. The opposition got the majority in parliament, which created a situation which allowed Morgan to boycott the runoff, which was a sham, because he had the backing of the majority in parliament. At the moment, there is no opposition, serious opposition in parliament. Boycotting may help, in my view, the autocratizers and the emerging democratic backlash that is taking place and taking root globally. But this is not an answer. This is just thinking aloud and provoking colleagues to look at it. The second question that you put on the table, Ibo, is there an election next week? My response to it is that I don't know. I know the date is 23, but I don't know whether the elections are going to be there. And I will tell you why. While at least a lot of people are looking at the context between Edie and Nelson, that's what is on the ballot. That is what is in the media. That's what is there in the public sphere. But there is another layer below that, which is more dangerous, more decisive, and that is the contestation between number 1 and number 2. That is between Edie and Chiwenga, because Edie's term is such that constitutionally he is standing for the last time, but there is no guarantee that he is going to stand for the last time. And yet he's number 2. He has been waiting for the opportunity to take over. He worked for this. He led the coup in 2017, and he thinks this is his time. And if the absence of the military on the ground is anything to go by, we don't know whether it is reform or it is in support of Chiwenga. We may, before the 23rd of August, have something dramatic. If those that changed the situation in 2017 feel that the situation is not going to change in their favor after the election. So we don't know. And what tells us about this is the banning of Katsukuwere, for example. Because when Katsukuwere was coming in, really, his presence was going to eat on the ZANU. He was going to create a situation where number 1 was not going to be able, or it was not going to be easier for him to take over, and perhaps number 2 was going to be better placed. So to say the elections are there in next week, yes, according to paper, yes, according to the timetable, yes, but I don't know. There are other possibilities, because the real issues and the real power and the real election, if I can use that word in courts, is the transfer of power within ZANU-PF. This is what they fear most. This is what they care most about than the opposition. They fear themselves more than they fear the opposition. So the internal dynamics, the internal ructions within ZANU-PF can be more determinative even before the 23rd. If not before, immediately after the 23rd, we are going to see, or we are likely to see, or it's possible for us to see more ructions, more conflictual relations, more maneuvers within the ruling party. And this is where FAS come in. Why would we have FAS, really? Why would we have FAS when for over the years, the Central Intelligence Organization, CIO, has been running these elections, has been running ZAC, he has been determining, he has been intimidating people. And this time around, we see a parallel organization being formed to do the work that the official Central Intelligence Organization has been doing. And there are claims is more inclined towards Russia. I mean, towards Russia, yes, where parallel systems like, I mean, with the Wagner Group and other parallel and quasi-parallel, I mean, quasi systems are there. And yet, number two is we don't know. Whilst Russia and China may seem to be friends, may seem to be working together in global issues, but when it comes to Zimbabwe, there are chances that they are not working will be formed. So we don't know. Number three for me, the new thing that is also available on the table is money. For the first time, we see money politics, real money politics playing a role in this election, where people are real given money, people are being bought, vote buying, vote inducement. And who is doing this? Of course, those that with money are those from the ruling party. They have access to the state coffers, the candidates have mining claims in the lithium sector and the gold sector, but most of them are also connected in one way or the other, working with the military officials or the militaries. So ZANU-PF are actually the candidates of the entire ZANU-PF. They could be candidates of a faction that is control over are those with the control of the military as well. So there's something new about money, but we don't know whether it is good for the entire ZANU system or it is part of one part of the ruling party. There is the issue that was raised by colleagues, and I don't need to agitate it again. The issue of the judiciary give money just months before the elections, huge amounts of money, $400,000 to the judiciary. What does it? The judiciary is also not just for the entire ruling party. They are part of the factions within the ruling party, and that faction is the faction of the president. He is the one that has got the judiciary on his side, and I think he is aware of the possibilities that I was talking about earlier. We are looking at the elections as ordinary elections, like any other elections in Africa and elsewhere in the world. But there is something deeper, there is something that is taking place in this country. What do we do? Of the people. The only power that can subvert what is going on in this country is power that can emanate from the grassroots. The ordinary people, the ordinary citizens be counted and demand their rights. Is the only way society and everybody else over the years have been doing that. But I don't think we have done enough for Zimbabweans to be able to stand up and be counted under these. I endorse what my colleagues said.
Gordon? 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 We see a close to Gordon.
Hello.
Are you back? Gordon, we had lost you.
You lost
Gordon,
me somewhere. Did you lose
Yes.
me somewhere?
Yes.
I am there.
Okay.
Yeah, but I
Maybe I should-
concluded unless you lost me
Let's
before I
ask you a
concluded.
question here. Just a follow-up question. You spoke about the judiciary.
Up.
The role of the judiciary in Zimbabwe has become nefarious ever since the coup. And really, we need to go back to the coup, because it appears to me that the Zimbabwean polity has forgotten that we had a coup. If also because the judiciary blessed the coup, the Chiweshe judgment, for example. But more important, the opposition itself has never raised the issue of constitutionality and the extent to which the coup, by definition, was against the constitution, and that we are, in fact, living in a military situation in which the judiciary said the military was justified to intervene, clearly against the constitution. And I'm talking about the ruling thereby. Why do you think that the opposition, and including yourself, have never made an issue of the coup and the need to cure the coup and restore constitutionalism and the rule of law? Why? Why is it not an issue at all? It's missing completely in the narratives of the opposition since the coup itself.
Thank you, Prof. There are three things for me. The first one, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. I can hear you.
Can you hear me?
I can hear
thank you. The first one, you would remember that, you would remember that when the coup took place in 2017, down the lane, it was endorsed by the countries, by the region. The region did not really, as we see today in Niger, where Zimbabwe there were some dissenting voice here and there, but quickly those dissenting voices were swallowed, and the coup was embraced. The international community itself as well, in a way, embraced the coup. In a very subtle ways, embraced the coup. And again, the coup takers, if I may use that term, by bringing all those people onto the streets, they created a semblance that it was a popular thing. So I think the civil society and others found it very difficult to stand up and disassociate themselves from the coup. Participated in that coup. Remember, I mean, people actually went to the stadium there and they gave solidarity speeches. So it was going to be a kind of vague for them to then say they are against the coup. I think it was naive on the part of everybody of that coup. Very few dissenting voices, but they were in the minority. So I think that's the reason it would not work now.
But Gordon, we have a ruling which actually justifies the military in intervening in politics, in civilian. It's there, the judgment by Chiweshe. Are we going to leave it as it is, or do you think it's something to be addressed as part of any settlement on Zimbabwe? Can you hear me, Gordon?
Yes, I can hear you. I think we have the legal mind here, Barry can help. But from where I sit, I totally agree with you that the intervention of the military into the political and civil affairs was endorsed and sanitized by the Chiweshe judgment. And if it has been challenged, I don't know, it has not been rescinded. It is still there. So, which means we are in a situation where it's against the constitution of Zimbabwe, because the constitution of Zimbabwe does not allow that. So we are living in an unconstitutional with the levers of power and the judiciary turning against itself and saying they did the wrong thing. And if they were to do that, they will be exposing their colleagues. Remember, we are being run by the executive military alliance in this country. They will be exposing their colleagues in the executive military alliance, thereby turning the whole thing unconstitutional in the country. But can I defer that question to somebody who can do a better job to it? But I think he can do that.
Zikamai, the ball is in your court now. Help us here. Do we have a constitutional crisis since the coup? A crisis that we are overlooking, that we are conveniently and expediently putting under the carpet? What's your view, Zikamai?
Yeah, Dr. Moyo there brings in a very interesting term. He said we are being ruled by the executive military alliance. I think there lies the answer. I do agree with you, and I think the observations are very clear that the opposition would not contest, would not then challenge the coup because they endorsed it.
Mm.
But that judgment, my view, by Justice Chiweshe, is a very dangerous judgment that I think should not be ignored. It still needs to be challenged. I think the politics of the matter, that the region and there were people in the streets and everyone was fooled. I think it's besides the point. I think it's the role of propaganda. It was clearly choreographed, and many of the people, innocent or otherwise, were fooled. But I think as a matter of principle, we have set a dangerous precedence for the country, where we want to say the military should be able to step in to defend the constitution. That then makes us a military state. And I think the executive military alliance that Dr. Moyo has made reference to has continued to dominate, and there's evidence for that. Constitution Amendment Act number 1, which saw the extension of the Chief Justice's term, did show that. And then secondly, the current sort of judgments that we're beginning to see that speak more to disenfranchisement than enfranchisement, more to exclusion than to inclusion. And all those, the third point is you will see, and we have seen during the COVID-19 pandemic, over 60 pieces of legislation were passed by the executive without the participation of the legislature. That is evidence of what Dr. Moyo is mentioning when he says an executive military alliance. The parliament has been totally overthrown. We saw the capture of the opposition camp properties. We saw representatives of the people's representatives of the people in parliament being kicked out, being recalled in a politically choreographed space. And I think all that comes at the backdrop of how many of us were fooled to think that the military can be a defender of the constitution. That's a wrong precedence, and I think we are sitting on a time bomb.
But is it not also true, Zikamai? Mnangagwa has tried in vain to exercise the state of the military in politics. Would you agree? that it's a nuisance which he has had to accept because of the reality that the military put him there. But I think, would you agree that any president, any civilian would want a situation where the military went back to the barracks? And to the extent that there is this executive military alliance, it's really a contradiction in terms of what Mnangagwa himself would have liked to see.
Yes, I think it's a contradiction within the ruling elite. It includes the military, the executive, the business elite as well. And I think it creates a state of insecurity in the upcoming State of Peace report that we are going to release, where we are focusing on living in perpetual fear. And that also affects key institutions that are constitutionally mandated to provide security, being the key architects of insecurity. There was a report that was released by the Century which looked at the role of the military in business and the role of business in the military. This is a situation wherein the military is able to receive funds outside the budget, creating a risk of elite capture of state institutions. And indeed, I think it does create a perpetual state of fear and a perpetual state of insecurity. And given the option, I don't think any president would want to preside over a country in which the military is allowed to overthrow him and is protected by the judiciary.
Yeah, so we are virtually in a state of emergency, right? Since 2017. That's a reality. Summarized by Gordon Moyo when he calls it an executive military alliance. Would you agree that we're in a state of emergency?
To a great extent, Dr. Mandaza, remember I mentioned that we are living in a country where the right to protest has basically disappeared, where the free exercise of, simple rights attracts the harsh end of the state. And to a great extent, indeed, that does appear like we find ourselves in a state of emergency. Remember, I made reference to 63 pieces of legislation being passed by the president without the participation of the parliament. And then associated with that is the recall of representatives of the people, creating a situation in which the lawmaking body ceases to be able to make the law for the good of the nation. Add to that the other arm of government, which is the judiciary, which has clearly shown that by Amendment Act number 2 to the Constitution, there is great interference of the executive, such that the fact that the parliament has lost the power to interrogate the executive on issues to do with corruption, signing of foreign agreements, obtaining of loans, that creates a situation in which the executive is operating without the participation of other critical arms of government, particularly the judiciary and the legislature.
In short, we don't have an accountable executive. We don't have a vibrant legislature. And we don't have a fiercely independent judiciary. That is the menu before us at the moment. How do we get there, Zikamai, briefly? How do we begin getting there? Accepting as we have that the election next week, if it takes place, Gordon thinks it might not take place. If it does take place, that it will not resolve our problems. Not least because the opposition itself has not put the issue of constitutionalism on the agenda. What do we do? What should we do after next week?
Yeah, I think Dr. Moyo has made reference to some of the points that I could comment on in terms of what do we do. There's a debate around boycotting elections. And I think perhaps the problem that we have in this country is thinking that elections are a solution to these problems that we are speaking about. But they are not. I think to that extent, Dr. Gordon Moyo, I agree with you. It is foolish to boycott elections without an alternative strategy. So I'm not advocating for a simple boycott of elections as an expression of protest. I'm advocating for a well-coordinated approach that brings together multiple stakeholders, including civil society, political leaders, in the international community, to come to the acknowledgement that the kind of problems that we have in this country will not be solved by elections or a performance of elections that are held in the current context. If anything, it's going to be very expensive in terms of the economy, but also in terms of human security. Because as we are already beginning to see the deteriorating human rights situation and the contest on elections, as well as the situation that will pertain after the elections, I agree with the issue around the role of money in elections. Money has been poured into our elections, and it is not for the purposes of advancing the will of the people. Rather, it is for the purposes of undermining the will of the people. So I do not think elections are a solution, and I think there is need for a very broad-based, multiple stakeholder coordination process so that we reach a settlement that creates conditions not just for free, fair, and credible elections, but for economic prosperity. I agree with Dr. Moyo that where we are gravitating towards is a situation wherein people are losing faith in elections, and the regimes that are modeling our kind of politics are not the kind of regimes that are celebrated for democracy. But I think that continuing to participate in elections as a performance actually worsens the kind of situation that we are in. I support a coordinated boycott, for want of a better word, of the thinking that elections are a solution to the kind of problems that we are. I support a push towards an inclusive, comprehensive national settlement to answer the key questions that we face, the questions that elections cannot answer.
Thanks, Zikamai. Before I turn to the floor for contributions, I want to just ask Barbara, any view on what is to be done?
Yeah, sure. Please go ahead.
Yes, please go ahead, Barbara.
Yes, definitely. I would like to concur with Zikamai and also what Dr. Moyo has said concerning the way forward. I do think that as Zimbabweans, we post the election, we need to come together and define what our problem is. I think we need to have kind of a common understanding of the problem. Because this probably not having a common understanding of the problem is what makes it such that we have others saying we should go ahead with the election, others saying we should not go for the election. I think it is because our understanding of our situation kind of differs. So I think a consensus kind of building exercise is needed where we get everybody to understand, to kind of have a common understanding of the Zimbabwe problem. Is our problem elections? Do we all agree that elections do not work? And if we agree that elections do not work for our country, then what is the solution? And I think that is something that we possibly need to do. So I think the proposition that Zikamai put on the table, that the process of doing that needs to be inclusive. It needs to include civil society. It needs to include the young people. It should include women. It should include the political parties and all the stakeholders that we think matter in this process. I don't think that it's a process that should leave anyone behind. And once we have defined the problem, we then move to the next stage to say, how do we resolve the problem that we have? If we agree that elections don't work, so what mechanism should we go with as a country? And I think that is something that we possibly need to do, and also perhaps some advocacy to get, you know, our support from regional stakeholders in terms of the solution that we are going to put at the table. And by regional stakeholders, I mean African, African institutions or African leaders. I emphasize on African leaders because I'm sure everyone here would agree with me that there is this, you know, new wave of, you know, Africanism, Africanness, and everything African. And I think as we think about the solution for Zimbabwe, we should also think of where we should go when we need support to some of our propositions. And I think I'll end there. Thank you.
Thanks, Barbara. I'll come back to you at the end to respond to questions and comments, and also to for you to give some indication. How do we get to our goal? It's always important to define the goal, but also to define the means, the agency through which to get where we want to get. And I think it's a question that we have to answer at the end of this session. In the meantime, I call on, we are over 80 people here. I'm sure there are many who would want to make the contribution, raise questions, make substantive interventions. You're most welcome. Please raise your hand. Tony Rila? Tony Rila, then Rekai Rusinga after him.
Okay. Right. I'm not going to mince my words. We talked about the coup to order this in relation to these current elections. And Ibo and I wrote a piece a while ago about the need for Zimbabwe to address a Lancaster House moment. And this is the crunch of the coup. So my understanding, and the constitutional lawyers I've spoken to said quite clearly that the effect of Chiweshi's judgment and the condemnation by the Constitutional Court or the Supreme Court, I can't remember which, is that the military have introduced a state of emergency in November 2017. That state of emergency has never, ever been revoked by the government. Now, the implication of that is that the coup has not been cured. So we now live, and I don't want to go with the stuff about a military-civilian alliance or state-military alliance. The answer is that that placed the military in control. And therefore, everything that happened from November 2017 means that we exist in a state of unconstitutionality. The 2018 elections, everything that happened subsequently, and this election exists in a state of unconstitutionality. So this election is prima facie and de jure unconstitutional. Therefore, what do? We have to cure the coup. The only way this can be cured is by a political settlement. That was what was avoided in 2017 by everybody, by MDCT at the time, the international community, everyone else, and it still remains the problem in the room. So in my view, these elections are unconstitutional. So whatever the result is, whether we spend endless times talking about did they do the things right or wrong or whatever, is underpinned by a deeper constitutional problem. The state is illegitimate. I want to know how we cure that, and I can't see that we can cure that except by a political settlement. Thank you.
Thanks, Tony. I'll now call on Rekai.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mandaza. I want to begin by saying that I think it matters a great deal that the opposition supported the so-called military-assisted transition in 2017. They should have stood by principle. You don't support such kind of an act if a democratic alternative. So that's number one. And I think people follow their leaders. I think that's why a lot of people also joined in supporting that kind of an intervention. And I think it's the same story with what you are talking about right now, where we have Zimbabwe going into an election under conditions that do not differ from those under which past elections have been held, to such an extent that you can almost predict the outcome of that election. Again, people are following their leaders. And I think in terms of the question that you asked to say, are we going to wait again for the opposition to approach the courts, for instance, if we have a contested election? I would say that the opposition should have a plan for dealing with that particular situation, because they are the ones who are leading people into this situation where they are supposed to go into another election under conditions that are exactly the same with what we used to have before. So they need to have a plan beyond just banking on the majority to say, we are going to have a majority voting in our favor in such a manner that it is not going to be possible for the election to be rigged. I want to bring to people's attention here one thing that I think people don't talk about a lot in terms of Zimbabwe's elections. Zimbabwe's elections are held, and each time they are held, at least from 2008, we've been having what is called the sample-based observation in Zimbabwe. Results as announced by the Electoral Commission have been consistent with the projections of that particular sample-based observation. I think what it suggests is that if we trust the methodology, the problem, as we all know, as all Zimbabweans know, is elsewhere, not on election day. I want to conclude by then saying that if the problem is with the pre-election period and we need to have electoral reforms instituted, implemented before we go into an election, and we are saying here, as one person who intervened suggested, that we need the support of the region, for instance, in this. Is the problem the regions or is ours? I remember in 2013, you made reference to the advice that was given for Zimbabwe not to go into an election without reforms. And there were politicians, including some principals in the GPA, who were opposition leaders, who invoked these external interference concerns, sovereignty concerns. So is the problem the regions or is ours? And where do we begin? Are we now going to say we are now coming to the region to say we now have a different position from that of 2013? Where do we begin? Thank you so much.
Rekai, stay there, please, Rekai. Rekai?
Yes, Dr. Mandaza.
Two questions I have for you.
Yes.
One, how do you explain the apparent confidence with which Chamisa has resolved to go into the election, notwithstanding? Is it something that he knows that we don't know, or is it just sheer religious fervor? That's the first question. The second question would be, what is the likely outcome? You can give scenarios if you want, next week on the 28th of, the results are announced on the 28th of August.
Thank you, Dr. Mandaza. To answer your first question, I think I would say, having read Zamchia's 2013 article, I'm not surprised that Chamisa is insisting on going into an election under the circumstances. This is somebody who said Mbonge Tsvangirai was going to win, and he said this is what God had showed him in his dreams. So I don't know what Chamisa is banking on. But it's not surprising coming from him. He did the same thing in 2018. We had somebody repeating the sentiments that he made to say, this time it's not going to be possible for these guys to rig. He said exactly the same thing in 2018. And what he said in 2013 should give us a perspective of, I don't know what the source of his confidence is. I don't want to answer to that. But all I'm saying is we should not be given confidence that nothing's going to happen because he had said so. We have seen in the past that it is not true. Then in terms of the scenarios, having looked at the Afrobarometer survey, the latest one, in terms of their predictions, the electoral outcomes if an election were to be held a day after the one they conducted their survey. Looking at that in conjunction with, like I said, the sample-based observation projections, I think that there is a chance that the opposition can actually win in these elections. But we all know in Zimbabwe, winning an election is one thing. Getting into power is a totally different thing. And I think the least that the opposition can do is have incontrovertible evidence in the form of election returns. If you don't have V11s, how do you challenge an election outcome? How do you have people protesting, challenging an election outcome when you don't have the evidence? People get shot in the streets. And I remember in 2018, somebody said it was even foolish for those people to do what they did when they were trying to contesting the election outcome. So all I'm saying is, if these people are not going to have polling agents in every polling station, let them not contest the electoral outcome because they are endangering people's lives. And to this day, we continue to see Twitter posts suggesting that they don't have polling agents in some polling stations to this day, a week before the election. It's not going to happen. They're not going to deploy those agents comprehensively. And I think it's a very bad situation we find ourselves in. Thank you.
So it's a foregone conclusion in your view?
Like I said, looking at the...
Where are you, Arekai? Where are you in Harare or where are you?
I'm currently out of the country.
The secret, right? Okay, that's fine. We are enjoying your contribution. That's why I'm asking. And we'd like to continue interacting with you. There's just one last question to you. One of the things which was mentioned in passing by Gordon Moyo, but which is clearly something very interesting given the last 2 decades, and in particular the 2017 coup and the 2018 elections, is the extent to which the military has been in the background. We don't know what they're thinking, don't know what they're planning, nor do we know what Chiwenga's plans are. But clearly, the powers that be, Mnangagwa in particular, have decided this time around not to involve the military. I did make the point earlier that Mnangagwa clearly feels very uncomfortable about the involvement of the military in politics. And this time he has formed this FAS, and significantly, talking to people from the rural areas, and having got the rural areas myself, there is no longer the presence of soldiers as we had in previous elections. To the extent that some rural people are even saying that they find FAS a more surmountable problem than the military was. Do you think the military might stand aside this time around and let things see themselves through? What is your view?
I'm not sure about the position that the military would take, Dr. Mandaza, but like you said, if the military is not going to play a role, there is this FAS that you've mentioned, and Dr. Gordon Moyo has also spoken about the same. What I think we should understand is that FAS has done a lot of work. They started operating, I think, if I'm not mistaken, around the time when people were registering to vote. And from what we've been told, they've mobilized for the ruling party, in support of the ruling party, with specific targets in the areas where they were operating. So it wouldn't be surprising that the ruling party will actually win this election, because there's a lot of people who have been mobilized to vote in support of the ruling party. And this is the reason why I'm saying, if the opposition is not going to have V11s, it should not let people go into the streets contesting the outcome, because the election would not have been rigged if it's going to be rigged on election day. But this will be an outcome that will be reflective of what would have happened way before the election. How do you challenge that? So I think, that's my point. Thank you.
But also we need to make a distinction between mobilization and regimentation. One of the things which has struck us here, where those of us who are at home, is the extent to which FAS, the militia, the ZANU-PF in general, have been able to bust hundreds of thousands of people across the country cohesively, no doubt, but all the same, it's done. And if they're able to do that in the pre-election period, what's likely to happen on election day and in the immediate aftermath of elections? So it's a frightening specter. Yeah? But I'll rest you. Okay. Let me move to others. Anyone else wants to come in?
Thank you.
Thank you, Rekai. Let's hear more. Anybody else? Amanda, you're free to speak. Francis?
Anybody from Pachedu in the room, or Robert Chapman?
Robert, are you in? Pachedu? Anybody from Pachedu? Professor Jonathan Moyo? Anybody wants to come in? Tony? One of the things that we have been discussing is, hello?
Hello, okay. One of the key things in this election was raised in 2018, and that is the way in which the state military, or the military state, subverted the entire constitutional process. And that was outlined in considerable detail by Jonathan Moyo in his book on Excelgate. So I'd be interested to have a comment from him, briefly if he can, on how he expects this election to plan out.
Anything on that quarter? Anybody else? Piers Pigu?
Yeah.
Piers, how's the region looking at the election next week? Piers?
Ivo, I don't have a sort of a clear view on that, but as you know, the SADC observation mission has recently jetted in. I understand that there was a meeting between ZANU and the ANC International Relations Committee quite recently, but that they just got read the same script by Mutsvangwa berating them, which surprised me, that insight, if that was indeed the case, given the utterances of Fikile Mbalula of late, which seems to resonate with their narrative. I think the region is, and South Africa's got its eye on BRICS, of course, at the moment, and I think the region is turning a blind eye. I'd be surprised if there was any mention in the communique of the Zimbabwean elections outside of wishing it well. So I think the region will sit on its hands as we go into this period. As a kind of, everyone seems to be waiting to see what will happen, and it's one of my takeaways from this conversation this evening is how people really just don't know what's going to happen next week, and that's and whether there will be serious problems, or how serious the problems will be that arise from the vote. So yeah, it's a sense of apprehension, but also I think turning a blind eye.
Fine, thanks.
Okay. Can I come in? Can I come in, Ivo? Yeah.
In fact, I think that maybe we can begin summing up. We can sum up now, Gordon, and then I'll move to Zikamai, and last but not least, Barbara. Go ahead.
Okay. The biggest question before us in this election 2023, really is the role of FAS. There will be a need for interrogation, for research on this. I will tell you why. Between the 27th of June and the July 13, the Public Policy Research Institute of Zimbabwe, to which I'm the director, carried out a pre-election survey, looking at the perceptions and the priorities of the voters ahead of the election. And we went out to all the 10 provinces in the country and interviewed 2,689 people. In the villages, we discovered that in every village, by the way, a village is about 25 homesteads. In every village, there were about 5 members of FARS strategically located. And part of my research assistants actually slept in one of the homesteads of the FARS member. And well, I would not discuss the details of the discussion in this platform, but all to say to you, there is a pervasive presence of FARS in this election, and they have money. They are well capacitated. They have documents of everybody where they are operating. And the question to me and to all of us, why should the ruling party set up a parallel quasi-military, quasi-intelligence, quasi-security organ to run an election when over the years it has been using the structures that are available? Is this new structure in sync with the existing structures? Is the military, has it been endorsed by the military? Is the military happy with its operations? Is the CIO, of course, the deputy director of the CIO is the director of FARS, but is the CIO system, security system as a whole, in sync with this system? Why would we have this kind of a system? The only reason that comes to my mind is that it's either whoever set it up was not or is not confident that he has the CIO with him. He has the police, he has the military in particular on his side. Therefore, that person, that whoever it was, but it is assumed it is the president, I think he is afraid, or he is not sure of his support of the military. And if he is not, what does it mean? Given that the military are the ones with the levers of power, given what happened in 2017 and the Chiweshe judgment. So that's why I said earlier on, we are traversing along uncertain territories in the electoral landscape of this country. That's my conclusion of this debate.
Thanks, Gordon. Thanks very much. There are a lot of chats there with almost 50 chats, and I hope you're able to access them. And in responding as you have done, Gordon, if you can come back to respond to any, you're welcome. But let me move to Zikamai Bere now. Zikamai, your final word.
Yeah, thank you very much. So, yeah, my final word is that to emphasize that elections in the current context will not give us an answer to the questions that we have as a nation. The confidence of our political leaders is putting all of us in danger. The false confidence that the current state of affairs in our country and the institutions have got the capacity to deliver the will of the people can actually be dangerous. When you look at the human rights situation alone, in the month of July, we recorded restrictions to freedom of assembly in excess of 3,900. Violent assaults in excess of 1,000. Hate speech in excess of 500. These are just snapshots into the human rights situation on the ground. That in itself means that a lot of people, by intimidation, by violence, are going to be excluded in the process. Bring in the dispute resolution mechanism. The history tells us that Zimbabwean presidential elections are called out by the courts more than by the election body. And when you then look at what has happened with Amendment Bill number 2, Amendment Act number 2 to our Constitution, and the rock bottom confidence that the people have in the judiciary, and the exclusive judgments that have been made to exclude rather than to include. Look at the role of us as colleagues have outlined. Tie that to the blatant disregard of the recommendations of the Montlindo Commission that were meant to promote accountability. Then you have a situation in which the will of the people may never find its true expression. Rekai, the colleague who spoke before, says winning election is one thing, but winning power is another. And the case of Dexter Nduna in Chegutu North, where even Zek agreed that they had made an error, he was not the winner. The court went on to refuse to make a pronouncement, saying they were out of time. That blatant approach to electoral disputes by the judiciary tells you that we are living in a Mungandidi atmosphere. By Mungandidi, I refer to a culture of impunity where institutions that are supposed to support the will of the people blatantly trample upon that will of the people, knowing that no one can fix them. Now, why would political leaders believe that by some miracle, if they did not correct a numerical error of turning a 9 into a 6 for a person who really, the election management board was saying he has won an election, why do they expect that it will be different for a presidential candidate? So I think it's very important that we have an honest conversation as civil society, our political leaders, the electorate, and the solidarity that we need from the regional community to come to terms with the reality that the current atmosphere in Zimbabwe will not be allowed to deliver the free expression of the people. So what can we do to make sure that we create a situation in which we are not just going to harvest more bloodshed, more human rights violations, more contests, and more violence in the streets? Elections are supposed to deliver hope for the people. In our country, they deliver fear, they deliver despair. And until such a time when the systems, the atmosphere, and the context can actually generate real hope for the people that they are going to participate and their will is going to win the day, we are probably contributing to postponing the problem and creating a performance that is a facade, but we are not solving the problems.
You're done, Zigamai?
Yes, Doc, thank you.
Yeah, well, I was enjoying what you're saying. Could have gone on. Let me move now to Barbara. Yours is the last word, Barbara.
Yes.
And speak as much as you want. Carry on, Barbara. 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 Have we lost Barbara?
We've lost her.
Barbara, you've gone. Perhaps she'll come back. Anyway, we have come to the end of this program. I just want to just say a few words before we thank the panelists who have been very, very good, really excellent. They helped us flesh out this subject. It appears that the elections will be held next week. There's little or nothing that can stop them now. As Zikamai said, the election industry is at work. We have hundreds of observers here already. And the machinery, just see the ZEC just announced, made a statement on the state of affairs with respect to the election. And if something happens to stop the election, to be the most untoward, if not also surprising. But Zimbabwe is not without surprises, as Gordon Moyo has indicated. The likely outcome, I think, by all accounts, most of us, particularly myself, conclude that this is another disputed election, no doubt about that. And on the other side of the thing, that the affairs and the state machinery has done what it is alleged to have done so comprehensively, including coercive regimentation across the country, then we are likely to have Mnangagwa re-elected in whatever disputed circumstances there might be, but it looks like this is what they've been working for. Already 2 weeks ago, Mnangagwa made a statement at a rally that we have already won the election. That won't be surprising to me. Thirdly, what should be done? I believe that, as I said earlier, this is a watershed election, watershed moment in the history of Zimbabwe, between a past which has clearly come to an end, even through natural attrition. People like Mnangagwa in the 80s, and likewise many of the lieutenants. And certainly the legacy of the war veterans is petering to an end, if it's not an end at all, but certainly war veterans are no longer a factor in our politics. And therefore we have a generational change, which, as I said earlier, has been delayed, but is both imminent and imminent. And we have to assist as civil society. And Surplus Trust, along with other organizations, have been discussing the idea of an international conference after the election to consider, as Tony indicated, a comprehensive political and economic settlement in Zimbabwe. And we are hoping that through a conference, we'll have eminent persons appointed, former presidents of South Africa, Tanzania, Kenya, Nigeria, and Mozambique, which eminent persons would then engage Zimbabweans across the political spectrum, civic society, the diaspora, no doubt about that. We have 6 million people out in the diaspora, and come to some conclusions, and possibly a Lancaster type conference to consider the future of Zimbabwe. We feel, as everyone has said, in particular Zikamai, that elections are not the solution for Zimbabwe. They will not be a solution. Certainly this election next week will not solve the problem that's confronting us. So on that note, I want to thank Barbara. Sorry we lost you. Zikamai and Gordon Moyo. And all of you who have turned up today, almost 100 people have turned up today. We really, really, really appreciate your presence. And Rekai, thank you too for engaging as you did. We will meet again on the 31st of August, a post-election analysis, if there is an election. Thank you, and good night.